They burning the country down with their progressiveness. It started with changing what gender is, then graduated to you're racist if you think that your life matters and your skin don't have melanin. They don't want peace, they want skeletons. They want men to pretend that they're feminine. They don't want an election, they got so offended by freedom that they just try killing the president. I used to think that the woke were misguided, but now I can see that they're evil. Twitter is angry that Trump isn't dead. You know who got shot? Innocent people. Thought y'all were tolerant, thought we were equals. I thought you valued how everyone feels. Then why are y'all celebrating an attempted assassination like you're part of Antifa? Thank God the left can't aim. Thank God the right don't riot. Welcome to the home of the brave. Freedom ain't afraid of violence. You wish you was dying?
Hey everybody, welcome back to BB and Bobina's Book Nook, a division of the vlogcast. I'm so glad you guys came back to join me. So we're continuing on in the book. We're continuing on in the book Son of Hamas by Mousab, Hassan, Yousef. If you look up in the upper right hand corner, also I'll remove myself from the chapter 2 through 3. So we're doing chapters 2 and 3 of Son of Hamas. So my name is Regina Connell. Thank you for joining me. This is BBN Bobina's Book Nook, a division of the vlogcast. All right, guys. So we left off in chapter 1 where Mousab is not quite 18 yet. He's just been arrested by the Israeli police, and he's been beaten, he's been cuffed, he's been checked out by some sort of physician, and then re-blindfolded, cuffed, and moved to another facility. And his last thought was, of his family. And we learned also that his father is also in an Israeli prison and has been for quite some time. So let's pick up in chapter 2, the Ladder of Faith, 1955 to 1977. My name is Mousab Hassan Yousef. I am the oldest son of Sheikh Hassan Yousef, one of the 7 founders of the Hamas organization. I was born in the West Bank city of Ramallah, and I am part of one of the most religious Islamic families in the Middle East. My story begins with my grandfather, Sheikh Yousef Dawood, who was the religious leader or imam for the village of Al-Haniya, Janiya. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, you guys. Located in the part of Israel that the Bible calls Judea and Samaria. I adored my grandfather. His soft white beard tickled my cheek when he hugged me, and I could sit for hours listening to the sound of his sweet voice chanting the Adhan, the Muslim call to prayer. And I had plenty of opportunities to do so, since Muslims are called to pray 5 times every day. Chanting Adhan and the Quran is not an easy thing to do well, but when my grandfather did it, the sound was magical. When I was a boy, some chanters bothered me so much that I wanted to stuff rags in my ears, but my grandfather was a passionate man, and he carried his listeners deep into the meaning of the Adhan as he sang. He believed every word of it. About 400 people lived in Al-Janiya in the days when it was under Jordanian rule and Israeli occupation. But the residents of this little rural village had little use for politics. Nestled into the gently rolling hills a few miles northwest of Ramallah, Al-Janiya was a very peaceful and beautiful place. Its sunsets tinted everything in hues of rose and violet. That sounds beautiful. The air was clean and clear, and from many of the hill's peaks, you could see all the way to the Mediterranean. By 4 o'clock every morning, my grandfather was on his way to the mosque. When he finished morning prayers, he would take his little donkey to the field, work the soil, tend his olive trees, and drink fresh water from the spring that flowed down the mountain. There was no air pollution because only one person in Al-Janiya had a car. When he was at home, my grandfather welcomed a steady stream of visitors. He was more than the imam. He was everything to the people in that village. He prayed over every newborn baby and whispered the Adhan in the child's ear. When someone died, my grandfather washed and anointed the body and wrapped it in winding clothes. He married them and he buried them. My father, Hassan, was his favorite son. Even as a young boy, before it was required of him, my father went regularly with my grandfather to the mosque. None of his brothers cared anything about Islam like he did. At his father's side, Hassan learned to chant the Adhan, and like his father, he had a voice and a passion that people responded to. My grandfather was very proud of him. When my father was 12 years old, my grandfather said, Hassan, you have shown that you are very interested in God and Islam. So I am going to send you to Jerusalem to learn Sharia. Sharia is Islamic religious law that deals with daily life, from family and hygiene to politics and economics. Hassan knew and cared nothing about politics or economics. He simply wanted to be like his father. He wanted to read and chant the Quran and to serve people. But he was about to learn that his father was much more than a trusted religious leader and beloved public servant. Because values and traditions have always meant more to the Arab people than government, constitution, and courts, men like my grandfather often became the highest level of authority, especially in areas where secular leaders were weak or corrupt. The word of a religious leader was considered law. My father was not sent to Jerusalem simply to study religion. His father was preparing him to rule. So, for the next few years, my father lived and studied in the old city of Jerusalem near the Dome of the Rock, the iconic golden domed structure that visually defines the profile of Jerusalem in the eyes of most of the world's people. At the age of 18, he completed his studies and moved to Ramallah, where he was immediately employed as imam of the mosque in Old Town. Filled with passion to serve both Allah and his people, my father was eager to begin his work in that community, just as his father had done in Al Janiya. But Ramallah was not Al Janiya. The former was a bustling city. The latter was a sleepy little village. The first time my father entered the mosque, he was shocked to find only 5 old men waiting for him. Everyone else, it seemed, was in the coffee houses and pornographic theaters, getting drunk and gambling. Even the man who chanted the Adhan for the mosque next door had run a microphone and cord from the minaret so he could continue the Islamic tradition without interrupting his card game. My father's heart was broken for these people, although he wasn't sure how he would ever reach them. Even his 5 old men admitted they only came to the mosque because they knew they were going to die soon and wanted to go to heaven. But at least they were willing to listen. So he worked with what he had. He led these fellows in prayer and he taught them the Quran in a very short amount of time. They grew to love him as if he were an angel sent from heaven. Outside the mosque, it was a different story. For many, my father's love for the God of the Quran only highlighted their own casual approach to the faith, and they were offended. Who is this child doing the Adhan? People scoffed, pointing to my baby-faced father. He doesn't belong here. He's a troublemaker. Why is this little guy embarrassing us? Only old people go to the mosque. I would rather be a dog than be like you, One of them shouted in his face. My father quietly endured the persecution, never shouting back or defending himself, but his love and compassion for the people would not let him give up. And he continued to do the work he had been called to do, urging the people to return to Islam and Allah. He shared his concerns with my grandfather, who quickly realized that my father had even greater zeal and potential than he had originally thought. My grandfather sent him to Jordan for advanced Islamic study. As you will see, the people he met there would ultimately change the course of my family's history and even affect the history of conflict in the Middle East. But before I continue, I need to pause briefly to explain a few important points of Islamic history that will help you understand why the countless diplomatic solutions that have been put forward have uniformly failed and can offer no hope for peace. All right, here we go. And he gives great history background. Between 1517 and 1923, Islam, personified by the Ottoman Caliphate, spread from its base in Turkey across 3 continents. But after a few centuries of great economic and political power, the Ottoman Empire became centralized and corrupt and began its decline. Under the Turks, Muslim villages throughout the Middle East were subject to persecution and crushing taxation. Istanbul was simply too far away for the Caliph to protect the faithful from abuses by soldiers and local officials. By the 20th century, many Muslims were becoming disillusioned and began to look for a different way of life. Some embraced the atheism of the recently arrived communists. Others buried their problems in liquor, gambling, and pornography, much of which was introduced by Westerners who were lured to the area by mineral wealth and growing industrialization. In Cairo, Egypt, a devout young primary school teacher named Hassan al-Banna wept for his countrymen who were poor, jobless, and godless. But he blamed the West, not the Turks, and he believed that the only hope for his people, especially the youth, was a return to the purity and simplicity of Islam. He went to the coffee houses, climbed up on tables and chairs, and preached to everyone about Allah. Drunkards mocked him, religious leaders challenged him, but most of the people loved him because he gave them hope. In March 1928, Hassan al-Banna founded the Society of the Muslim Brothers, popularly known as the Muslim Brotherhood. The goal of the new organization was to rebuild society according to Islamic principles. Within a decade, every province in Egypt had a branch. Wow, that's quick. Al-Banna's brother established a chapter in the Palestinian territories in 1935. And after 20 years, the Brotherhood numbered about 500,000 in Egypt alone. Members of the Muslim Brotherhood were largely drawn from the poorest and least influential classes, but they were fiercely loyal to the cause. They gave out of their own pockets to help their fellow Muslims, as called for in the Quran. Many people in the West who stereotype all Muslims as terrorists don't know about the side of Islam that reflects love and mercy. It cares for the poor, widows, and orphans. It facilitates education and welfare. It unites and strengthens. This is the side of Islam that motivated those early leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood. Of course, there is also the other side, the one that calls all Muslims to jihad, to struggle and contend with the world until they establish a global caliphate led by one holy man who rules and speaks for Allah. This will be important for you to understand and to remember as we go along. But back to our history lesson. In 1948, the Muslim Brotherhood attempted a coup against the Egyptian government, which the Brotherhood blamed for the nation's growing secularism. The uprising was interrupted before it could get traction. However, when the British mandate ended and Israel declared its independence as a Jewish state, Muslims throughout the Middle East were outraged. According to the Quran, when an enemy invades and sorry, there's a little skip. There's a storm in the area. It might be kind of messing up the Wi-Fi, but I am directly connected, so we should be good. So let me reread that. The uprising was interrupted before Muslims throughout the Middle East were outraged. According to the Quran, when an enemy invades any Muslim country, all Muslims are called as one to fight to defend their land. From the viewpoint of the Arab world, foreigners had invaded and now occupied Palestine, home of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, Islam's third holiest place on earth after Mecca and Medina. The mosque was built on the site from which it was believed that Muhammad had traveled with the angel Gabriel to heaven and spoken with Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq immediately invaded the new Jewish state. Among the 10,000 Egyptian troops were thousands of Muslim Brotherhood volunteers. The Arab coalition, however, was outnumbered and outgunned. Less than a year later, the Arab troops had been driven out. As a result of the war, about 750,000 Palestinian Arabs fled or were expelled from their homes in the territories that became the State of Israel. Although the United Nations passed Resolution 194, which stated in part that refugees wishing to return to their homes and live at peace with their neighbors should be permitted to do so, and that compensation should be paid for the property of those choosing not to return. So that is in the Levitical laws, Moses laws, whatever. That's in the Bible. And I mean, let's keep going. I'll let Mousab, Hassan, Yousef, and Brackin tell it. Tens of thousands of Palestinians who fled Israel during the Arab-Israeli war never regained their homes and land. Many of these refugees and their descendants live in squalid refugee camps operated by the United Nations to this day. When the now armed members of the Muslim Brotherhood returned from the battlefield to Egypt, the suspended coup was on again, but news of the overthrow plan leaked out, and the Egyptian government banned the Brotherhood, confiscated its assets, and imprisoned many of its members. Those who escaped, assassinated Egypt's prime minister a few weeks later. Hassan al-Banna, in return, was assassinated on February 12, 1949, presumably by the government secret service. But the Brotherhood was not crushed. In just 20 years, Hassan al-Banna had shaken Islam out of its dormancy and created a revolution with armed fighters. And for the next few years, the organization continued to add to its numbers and its influence among the people, not only in Egypt, but also in nearby Syria and Jordan. So if you guys hear the noise, that's the rain on the tin roof. I just love rain on a tin roof. All right, let's keep going. By the time my father arrived in Jordan in the mid-1970s to continue his studies, The Muslim Brotherhood there was well established and beloved by the people. Its members were doing everything that was on my father's heart, encouraging renewed faith among those who had strayed from the Islamic way of life, healing those who were hurt, and trying to save people from the corrupting influences in society. He believed these men were religious reformers to Islam, as Martin Luther and William Tyndale were to Christianity. They only wanted to save people and improve their lives, not to kill and destroy. And when my father met some of the early leaders of the Brotherhood, he said, "Yes, this is what I have been looking for." What my father saw in those early days was the part of Islam that reflects love and mercy. What he didn't see, what he perhaps has never yet allowed himself to see, is the other side of Islam. Islamic life is like a ladder with prayer and praising Allah as the bottom rung. The higher rungs represent helping the poor and needy, establishing schools, and supporting charities. The highest rung is jihad. The ladder is tall. Few look up to see what is at the top, and progress is usually gradual, almost imperceptible, like a barn cat stalking a swallow. The swallow never takes its eyes off the cat. It just stands there, watching the cat pace back and forth, back and forth. But the swallow does not judge depth. It does not see that the cat is getting a little bit closer with every pass until, in the blink of an eye, the cat's claws are stained with the swallow's blood. Traditional Muslims stand at the foot of the ladder, living in guilt for not really practicing Islam. At the top are fundamentalists, the ones you see in the news killing women and children for the glory of the God of the Quran. Moderates are somewhere in between. After reading this book, it really made me reconsider that word moderate. Truly. The day my father first put his foot on the bottom rung of the ladder, he could never have imagined how far from his original ideals he would eventually climb. And 35 years later, I would want to ask him, "Do you remember where you started? You saw all those lost people. Your heart broke for them, and you wanted them to come to Allah and be safe. Now, suicide bombers and innocent blood? Is this what you set out to do?" But speaking to one's father about such things is not done in our culture. And so he continued on that dangerous path. Wow, guys, man, that's crazy. All right, let's continue on. Chapter 3. Sorry, we just finished chapter 2. Muslim Brotherhood, 1977 to 1987. When my father returned to the occupied territories after his studies in Jordan, he was filled with optimism and hope for Muslims everywhere. In his mind, he saw a bright future brought about by a moderate manifestation of the Muslim Brotherhood. Accompanying him was Ibrahim Abu Salem, one of the founders of the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan. Abu Salem had come to help breathe life into the stagnated brotherhood in Palestine. He and my father worked well together, recruiting young people who shared their passion and forming them into small activist groups. In 1977, with only 50 dinars in his pocket, Hassan married Ibrahim Abu Salam's sister, Saba Abu Salam. I was born the following year. When I was 7 years old, our family moved to Al-Bireh, the twin city of Ramallah, and my father became Imam of Al Amari refugee camp, which was established within Al Baray's municipal borders. 19 camps dotted the West Bank, and Al Amari had been established in 1949 on about 22 acres. By 1957, its weathered tents had been replaced by wall to wall, back to back concrete houses. Streets were the width of a car, their gutters flowing with raw sewage like rivers of sludge. The camp was overcrowded, the water undrinkable. One lone tree stood at the center of the camp. The refugees depended on the United Nations for everything. Housing, food, clothing, medical care, and education. When my father went to the mosque for the first time, he was disappointed to find only 2 rows of people praying, with 20 men in each row. Several months later, after he began to preach in the camp, however, people filled the mosque and overflowed into the streets. In addition to his devotion to Allah, my father had a great love and compassion for the Muslim people, and in return, they too grew to love him very much. Hassan Yousef was so likable because he was just like everyone else. He did not think of himself as higher than those he served. He lived as they lived, ate what they ate, prayed like they prayed. He didn't wear fancy clothes. He drew a small salary from the Jordanian government, barely enough to cover his expenses, which supported the operation and maintenance of religious sites. His official day off was Monday, but he never took it. He didn't work for wages. He worked to please Allah. For him, this was his holy duty, his life's purpose. In September 1987, my father took a second job teaching religion to the Muslim students who attended a private Christian school in the West Bank. Of course, that meant we saw less of him than before, not because he didn't love his family, but because he loved Allah more. What we didn't realize, however, was that a time was coming in the days ahead when we would hardly see him at all. While my father worked, my mother carried the burden of raising the children alone. She taught us how to be good Muslims, waking us for dawn prayer when we were old enough and encouraging us to fast during the Islamic holy month of Ramadan. There were now 6 of us, my brothers, Sohaib, Sayef, and always my sisters, Sabila and Tasneem, and myself. Even with my father's income from 2 jobs, we barely had enough money to pay the bills. My mother worked hard to stretch every dinar until it snapped. Savila and Tasneem started helping my mother with the chores when they were very young. Sweet and pure and beautiful, my sisters never complained, even though their toys were covered with dust because they didn't have time to play with them. Instead, their new toys were kitchen utensils. Wow. The things we take for granted. All right, let's keep going. You do too much, Savila. My mother told my oldest sister, you need to stop and rest. But Savila just smiled and continued working. My brother, Sohaib, and I learned very early how to build a fire and use the oven. We did our share of cooking and washing dishes, and we all looked after always the baby. Our favorite game was called Stars. My mother wrote our names on a sheet of paper, and every night before bedtime, we gathered in a circle so she could award us stars based on what we had done that day. At the end of the month, the one who had the most stars was the winner. It was usually Savila. Of course, we had no money for actual prizes, but it didn't matter. Stars was more about earning our mother's appreciation and honor than anything else. And we always waited eagerly for our little moments of glory. The Ali Mosque was just half a mile away from our house, and I felt very proud to be able to walk there by myself. I desperately wanted to be like my father, just as he had wanted to be like his father. Across the street from Ali Mosque, loomed one of the largest cemeteries I had ever seen, serving Ramallah, Al Birey, and the refugee camps. The cemetery was 5 times as big as our entire neighborhood and was surrounded by a 2-foot high wall. 5 times a day, when the Adhan called us to pray, I walked to and from the mosque past thousands of graves. For a boy my age, the place was unbelievably creepy, especially at night when it was totally dark. I couldn't help imagining the roots of the trees feeding on the buried bodies. Once, when the Imam called us to noon prayer, I purified myself, put on some cologne, dressed in nice clothes like my father wore, and set off for the mosque. It was a beautiful day. As I neared the mosque, I noticed that more cars than usual were parked outside, and a group of people were standing near the entrance. I removed my shoes like I always did and went in. Just inside the door was a dead body, wrapped in white cotton in an open box. I had never seen a corpse before, and even though I knew I shouldn't stare, I couldn't take my eyes off him. He was wrapped in a sheet with only his face exposed. I watched his chest closely, half expecting him to start breathing again. The Imam called us to line up for prayer, and I went to the front with everyone else, though I kept glancing back at the body in the box. When we finished our recitations, the Imam called for the body to be brought to the front to receive prayer. 8 men lifted the coffin to their shoulders, and one man shouted, La ilaha illallah, Allah. There is no God but Allah. As if on cue, everyone else began shouting as well. La ilaha illa Allah. La ilaha illa Allah. So, and that translated is, there is no God but Allah. I put my shoes on. I put on my shoes as quickly as I could and followed the crowd as it moved into the cemetery. Because I was so short, I had to run between the legs of the older guys just to keep up. I'd never actually been inside the cemetery, but I reasoned that I would be safe since I was with so many other people. Do not step on the graves, someone shouted. It is forbidden. I carefully made my way through the crowd until we arrived at the edge of a deep, open grave. I peered to the bottom of the 8-foot hole where an old man was standing. I had heard some of the kids in the neighborhood talk about this man, Juma'ah. They said he never attended mosque and did not believe in the God of the Quran, but he buried everybody, sometimes 2 or 3 bodies a day. Isn't he afraid of death at all? I wondered. The men lowered the corpse into Juma'ah's strong arms. Then they handed him a bottle of cologne and some green stuff that smelled fresh and nice. He opened the winding sheet and poured the liquid over the body. Juma'ah turned the body onto its right side, facing Mecca, and built a little box around it with pieces of concrete. As 4 men with shovels filled in the hole, the imam began to preach. He began like my father. "This man is gone," he said as the dirt fell onto the dead man's face and neck and arms. "He left everything behind: his money, building, sons, daughters, and wife. This is the destiny of each of us." He urged us to repent and stop sinning. And then he said something I had never heard from my father. "This man's soul will soon return to him, and 2 terrible angels named Munkar and Nakir will come out of the sky to examine him. They will grab his body and shake him, asking, 'Who is your God?' If he answers incorrectly, they will beat him with a big hammer and send him down into the earth for 70 years. Allah, we ask you to give us the right answers when our time comes." I stared down into the open grave, horrified. The body was nearly covered by now, and I wondered how long it would be before the interrogation would begin. And if his answers are not satisfactory, the weight of the dirt above him will crush his ribs. Worms will slowly devour his flesh. He will be tormented by a snake with 99 heads and a scorpion the size of a camel's neck until the resurrection of the dead, when his suffering may earn Allah's forgiveness. I couldn't believe all this was happening right by my house every time they buried someone. I had never felt good about this cemetery. Now I felt even worse. I decided that I needed to memorize the questions, so when the angels interrogated me after I died, I would be able to answer correctly. The imam said that the examination would begin as soon as the last person left the cemetery. I went home, but I could not stop thinking about what he had said. I decided to head back to the cemetery and listen for the torture. I went around the neighborhood trying to get my friends to come with me, but they all thought I was crazy. I would have to go alone. All the way back to the cemetery, I trembled with fear. I couldn't control it. Soon I found myself standing in an ocean of graves. I wanted to run, but my curiosity was stronger than my dread. I wanted to hear questions, screaming, anything, but I heard nothing. I moved closer until I touched a headstone. Only silence. An hour later, I was bored and went home. My mother was busy in the kitchen. I told her that I had gone to the cemetery where the imam said there would be torture. My and I went back after the people left the dead man, but nothing happened. Torture can only be heard by animals, she explained, not humans. For an 8-year-old boy, that explanation made perfect sense. Every day after that, I watched as more bodies were brought to the cemetery. After a while, I actually began to get used to it and started hanging around just to see who had died. Yesterday, a woman. Today, a man. One day, they brought 2 people in. And then a couple of hours later, they brought someone else. When no one new came, I walked among the tombs and read about the people already buried there. Dead 100 years, dead 25. What was his name? Where was she from? The cemetery became my playground. Like me, my friends were afraid of the cemetery at first, but we dared each other to go inside the walls at night. And since none of us wanted to be seen as cowards, we all eventually overcame our fears. We even played soccer in the open spaces. As our family grew, so did the Muslim Brotherhood. Before long, it had transitioned from an organization of the poor and refugees to include educated young men and women, businessmen, and professionals who gave out of their own pockets to build schools and charities and clinics. Seeing this growth, many young people in the Islamic movement, particularly those in Gaza, decided that the Brotherhood needed to take a stand against the Israeli occupation. We have taken care of society, they said, and we will continue to do that. But will we accept occupation forever? Doesn't the Quran command us to drive out the Jewish invaders? These young men were unarmed, but they were tough and hard and spoiling for a fight. My father and the other West Bank leaders disagreed. They were not ready to repeat the mistakes of Egypt and Syria, where the Brotherhood had attempted coups and failed. In Jordan, they argued, our brothers do not fight. They participate in elections and have a strong influence on society. My father did not oppose violence, but he didn't think his people were in any position to take on the Israeli military. For several years, the debate within the Brotherhood continued and the grassroots pressure for action increased. Frustrated with inaction of the Muslim Brotherhood, Fathi Shakaki had founded Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the late 1970s. But even so, the Muslim Brotherhood was able to maintain its nonviolent stance for another decade. In 1986, a secret and historic meeting took place in Hebron, just south of Bethlehem. My father was there, though he didn't tell me about it until many years later. Contrary to some inaccurate historical accounts, the following 7 men were present at this meeting. 1. A wheelchair-bound sheikh, Ahmed Yassin, who would become the spiritual leader of the new organization. Muhammad Jamal al-Natche from Hebron, Jamal Mansour from Nablus, Sheikh Hassan Yousef, my father, Mahmoud Musli from Ramallah, Jamil Hamami from Jerusalem, Eman Abu Teha from Gaza. The men who attended this meeting were finally ready to fight. They agreed to begin with simple civil disobedience, throwing stones and burning tires. Their objective was to awaken, unify, and mobilize the Palestinian people and make them understand their need for independence under the banner of Allah and Islam. Hamas was born, and my father climbed a few more rungs toward the top of the ladder of Islam. So there is a footnote in the back where he cites the resources, and I'm just going to go to the number 1. And it's like a, sorry. It's like the footnotes, and the sources and the timelines and the footnotes, all of it are amazing. So we'll read this footnote and then we'll close out, guys. So, end notes. 1, no one has ever had this information before. In fact, the record of history is already filled with numerous inaccuracies about the day that Hamas was born as an organization. For example, Wikipedia inaccurately claims that Hamas was created in 1987 by Sheikh Ahmed Yassin Abdel Aziz al-Rantisi and Muhammad Teha of the Palestinian wing of Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood at the beginning of the First Intifada. This entry is accurate regarding only 2 of the 7 founders and it is off by a year. And then he gives the thing. So I'm not going to read the rest of that. Go pick up the book. You guys, thank you for joining me for BBN Babina's Book Nook. We started a new book, Son of Hamas by Mousab, Hassan, Yousef. I want to thank my TikTok community and family for joining me. We've been going all day on TikTok, hadn't we? Huh? So, Son of Hamas by Mousab, Hassan, Yousef. Don't forget the next book. And I forgot, you guys, I should have changed that. So, the next book that we're going back to, we're finishing out Lincoln, the shocking assassination that changed America forever. And don't forget, we're going to be picking up 3 more books in the Killing series by Bill O'Reilly and Martin Dugard, since we just finished Killing Jesus and Killing Kennedy. I definitely want to do Killing the Rising Sun, and I want to do Killing Reagan. You guys, as a community, picked the 3rd Killing book in the Killing series by Bill O'Reilly and Martin Dugard. They have so many out there. So we've already done Killing Jesus, A History, Killing Kennedy, The End of Camelot. We're halfway through Killing Lincoln, the shocking assassination that changed America forever. And then next we will be doing Killing the Rising Sun, Killing Reagan. And you guys choose the 3rd one. Let me know in the comment section, direct message, whatever. Let me know. Okay, you guys, my name is Regina Connell. If you enjoy this, please hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And I guess I got to go catch up on world events and catch up on the content creators that I love and get my news from. You guys be blessed. See you on the next round. Thank you for joining me today here on BBN, Babina's Book Nook, a division of the vlogcast. And I'll change this. All right, guys, thank you. See you next time here on the vlogcast.